Welcome to this interview with Bill Eddy, one of the world's leading high conflict specialists. In this interview, he shares his tips and insights into managing workplace narcissists and other high conflict people. He shares his offerings in his latest book, It's All Your Fault at Work, a book he co-authored with Georgie DiStefano. We join this webinar as he introduces the cycle of high conflict thinking. Enjoy.
When they're not, they overreact to that. And so we have what we call a mistaken assessment of danger. And it could be that people are looking down on them, or it could be that people are, they're afraid they're going to abandon them, or they're going to dominate them, etc. So that mistaken assessment of danger leads them to engage in behavior that's aggressively defensive. So they may go on the attack because they feel attacked. And so this attack may be legal by filing lawsuits. It may be financial, trying to, get money. It may be, in some rare cases, it's violent. Because they're so angry about what they think is being said about them, done to them, etc. So their behavior becomes aggressively defensive, but it's really because they truly feel that they're being threatened. But then the third part is they get negative feedback. They get negative feedback from friends, family, coworkers, supervisors. And that's kind of automatic. It's a natural instinct to want to tell people, you're acting badly, cut it out. Let me show you what you're doing wrong. Unfortunately, with high conflict people, that doesn't change their behavior for the better. It actually reinforces their belief that they're in danger, because now they feel put down, they feel criticized, and they're extremely defensive about that. So you see this cycle. It's basically mad to bad to NF, this negative feedback. So a lot of what we teach in the book is ways to avoid giving them negative feedback and instead focus them on the future, focus them on problem solving, focus them on some of their choices so that they're not just defensively reacting. So that's the benefit of that, is it really helps see my negative feedback isn't going to help. I need to do an alternative to that.
You describe in the book, when you start talking about the negative feedback, a shift to feed forward, and that this is a paradigm shift. Can you expand on that?
Yes. Yeah. Georgie DiStefano and I, when we were starting to work on the book, we're talking about you just can't give these folks feedback. And Georgie said, well, so what you're saying is we need to feed forward. And we really liked that concept. So we're really talking a lot now about feed forward. So feed forward means basically not talking about the past if possible. And if you have to talk about past behavior, still putting the emphasis on the future. Also not trying to have them reflect back on their past behavior. Self-reflection doesn't work with high conflict people. Just forget about it. And also not being intensely emotional with them. Yes, there on the slide is just forget about. We're still working on how that's supposed to be spelled. But the idea is focusing backwards, feedback, just escalates these folks. So instead is calmly focusing forward on choices, etc., because they haven't messed up the future yet. But if you look at the past, even if you're trying to be friendly and helpful, high conflict people are very defensive. So unless you have to for disciplinary purposes or whatever, really instead focus on the future. So that's the paradigm shift, is really from the past and self-reflection to the future, and we don't expect self-reflection, so we just use our method that we call the CARS method. And this is a feed forward approach.
Bill, I love your expression, just forget about it. And for me, it was the biggest turning point for me when interacting with high conflict people. And as you know, as a mediator, I do deal with them all the time. We just have to forget that their logic is not our logic. And when we can accept that they've got a different view and a different logic, and our view is irrelevant, it just makes it so much easier. You can just let it go. Any concepts of being on the same page as them. So that
Right.
was just one of the best expressions for me ever. So, Bill, your secret techniques. Well, not secret if you buy the book. How do we deal with
Right.
high conflict people?
Well, basically, we've developed a method we call the CARS method, or the CARS technique. It includes connecting, analyzing, responding, and setting limits. And actually, Georgie and I have been using this method for many years in different settings. The workplace for her, more legal disputes, more for me. And we're getting more and more refined about it. But it seems to address 4 of their key problem areas. They have trouble connecting with people, so we need to connect better with them. They don't tend to analyze, they tend to react. And so we're just really trying to help them look at future options, etc. So analyzing, responding to misinformation. They have a lot of distorted information and also hostility. So we have a technique I'll get to in a little bit for addressing that. And then setting limits because they don't stop themselves. So basically, this is the overview, but let me start really with connecting. And connecting, we emphasize ear statements, as you see on the slide. A statement that includes some empathy, some attention, and or respect. And what we've learned is this is really effective at very quickly, in a matter of seconds, with a lot of high conflict people, calming them down. So if they're in your face angry, blaming, it's all your fault, you did everything wrong, then it's the opposite of what you feel like doing. But if you can respond and say, wow, I see how upset you are. Let's talk about this. I want to understand what's going on. And if you do that with a sympathetic tone of voice or a friendly tone of voice, and your body language looks open to them rather than harsh or frowning, then they tend to calm down. And by doing this, it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with the content of a complaint. In fact, you might not, but you're trying to connect with them as a human being. And we've been teaching this technique for over 10 years and just get a lot of good feedback about it that people say in different cultures, even with teenagers and young children, that this helps calm people down. So when someone's angry with you, this is the best way to respond rather than anger back, which with high conflict people just makes them act worse. So that's the CARS, that's the ear statement. Do you want me to go on with each, or?
Yes. Yeah, continue. Okay. I'm loving it, Bill. Continue.
Okay, great. So the A is for analyzing options. You want to get the person thinking. You want them to do thinking. Don't just do the thinking for them. Is ask them, well, what do you see as some of the options that you might have here? Some of the things that you might do. Let's look, sometimes we have people making a list of options. And by making the list of options, they're able really to realize they're not trapped, that they do have some alternatives. So to brainstorm and write it down, it really helps when people write things down. It helps calm them and focus their attention. then see, are some of these options really a reflection of my high conflict thinking, or is this realistic? And then pick one of several and analyze it and decide, is that the option I want to do? What helps is to ask the person themselves to do this rather than doing it for them. And then when they decide what they're going to do, they're more likely to carry it out, and they can feel good about their decision. So analyzing options, getting people thinking, writing lists, making proposals, these are all ways that engage them in thinking rather than just doing that thinking for them.
You've also got a really good checklist in the book that helps look at those analyzation options and take you through that.
Yes, so there's really a list of about 10 steps that you can consider in helping somebody analyze options. And I might mention here, we have a coaching method that we call New Ways for Work, and analyzing options is one of the activities a coach can help an employee with or a manager with in a more coaching or counseling setting. But you can actually do this at any time, and you can do this for yourself or help somebody with that. And so we look at, there's a lot of questions you can ask. You know, how realistic is the option? Is there someone else that needs to be involved? And what's the steps? What's the planning? What would the next part be? What are some of the what ifs? What if this happens? What if that happens? Making a list of pros and cons. Is there anyone else we have to get to buy into this option? So we've really developed this set of questions that can help someone think it through. And by thinking it through, people calm down and they're more effective at problem solving. So we definitely take that approach. You're right about that. I'll go ahead with responding then.
Yeah, this is
Responding.
Sorry, Phil.
Go ahead.
This for me is one of the biggest complaints I hear, because people get concerned about their reputation and the miscommunication that's out there, and they're saying all this stuff and contradictory stories, and people just don't know how to respond to the misinformation and or the hostility. They feel quite helpless. So I found this section of the book really powerful.
Good. And we have been this has been an area that frustrates so many people, because they get attacked, let's say, in an email, and they say, well, I can't just ignore that. I have to respond. But if I respond in the same way, then I look like a high conflict person. So what should I do? So we developed a method we call the Biff response method. And I might mention, if you're curious for more information about that, we talk about it in the book, It's All Your Fault at Work. We also have a website dedicated to the Biff response method, ironically called biffresponse.com. So people, if they're interested in that, we have Biff coaching and we have articles and a book about that. But the method is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Now, I know when I came to Australia and started teaching this method, people said, well, Bill, Biff is already part of our language here. And I understand that a Biff is a fight at a sporting event, and the rumors I hear is people want more Biff at their sporting events.
Some people on the paddock, but not in the office.
That's right. That's right. You don't want that in the office. But regardless, we figured out a solution, and that is, we call this a Biff response. So if somebody wants to start a fight with you, have a Biff with you, this is a way to respond calmly, brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And it really helps you feel good about your response. And if your response and the original email ever show up other places, you're going to look good and the other person's not going to look so good because it looks like they're just blaming and venting and all of that. So BIF responses, with High Conflict Institute, we've been teaching BIF responses, I think it's 8 years now. We started that in 2007, teaching this method. And we're guessing we probably taught about 10,000 people from the book, from the articles, and from our seminars. And we consistently get good feedback that people like that. It helped them figure out how to respond. So it really helps you calm down. And I should mention, in the book we have about that, BIF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People. People can go to the High Conflict Institute website for that. It teaches a coaching method in there. So someone who's working with employees, working with clients, can coach someone once they've drafted a response to a hostile email, for example, can coach them to clean up their email so it really may be more effective and less likely to get a negative reaction. So this is one area we're just really excited about, that, you know, difficult emails trouble people so much. In the workplace, you get them from customers, coworkers, sometimes even supervisors. And this is a very simple method. And it doesn't take long at all. People say, oh, I'm going to spend hours responding to all of this stuff, when in fact, a BIF response typically is 3 or 4 sentences and you're done. So we're real happy with that method. And some of the questions are, should I respond? And often you decide, yes, if I do it with the BIF response. Then what would be more accurate information? The I for BIF, informative, is really focused on just straight information. It's not defensive, it's not emotional, it's not counterattacking. And then who should I send it to? So sometimes it's a question, let's say someone has made a public disparaging remark about you, either sent it to 20 people in your workplace or something like that, and you're wondering, should I respond to all those people? And generally, my belief is that you should, that you want to set the record straight with your information to the same people. Otherwise, they're likely to start thinking maybe it's true what's been said about you. So often it helps to email back to the same community, but do it as a BIF response. You're just saying, people may not be clear on this issue, and here's my information. And the information is what sets it straight, rather than you saying nasty things about the person that wrote the original email. So that's a lot of thoughts about responding.
And I think when you're correcting misinformation, if you've got someone who's constantly putting out that misinformation, and if you consistently are very polite and BIF response to their misinformation, they'll realize that they can't get away with that. They'll stop doing it to you.
Right. It's actually a good technique for bullying. If someone's getting bullied by emails, things like that, is it lets the person know you're not just going to let it pass, but that you're not counterattacking. You're just providing information. So you're absolutely right.
There appears to be a misunderstanding. It's a great expression.
Yeah. And here's some information you may not have.
Yes. Yeah.
Or thank you for raising this issue. Here's some information you may not have, blah, 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 and then have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Good luck with that presentation, or something friendly to end it with.
And sometimes it helps just to write it and then give yourself some time and revisit it, go through the checklist, your BIF checklist, or get someone to look at it and then resend it, because we need to calm down.
Exactly. You can get in a lot of trouble for what you do before you calm down. So, and especially on the internet, they say nothing disappears on the internet. Once it's out there probably forever. So be careful about what you send when you're upset.
Absolutely.
So I'll go ahead and talk about the S of CARS, is setting limits. And think about it really in two steps, is what are the rules? And in many ways, it helps to just talk about the policies, the procedures, the law. Don't make it personal. Just say, for your information, we're required to do such and such, and we're not allowed to do such and such. The ethical rules for our profession prevent us from fulfilling that request. The legal standards expect us to do such and such. So you're not pointing the finger at the person, you're kind of pointing at the rules and procedures and saying, hey, we all have to follow this. So let me explain what we need to do now. One of the things when you're setting limits is creating a sense of we, kind of we have a situation here that needs to be resolved. And this is what I expect you to do. This is what needs to be done. This is what we need to do. Upper management is now made such and such a priority, so we're all going to need to put more time into this new priority rather than something else. And so this is a way you can communicate to your employees or coworkers that something just has to be done. And that way it's not personal. The second part of this is what the consequences are if something is violated. And a lot of times high conflict people aren't thinking about the consequences. And so they're just reacting to the moment. And so you can say, you may not realize this, but if we do such and such, then here's the negative consequence for that. So we better do such and such else instead. So educating them about these consequences, educating them about the policies and procedures can make it feel more like we're on the same team and here's something that needs to be done, rather than I'm against you and the feeling of making it personal. Why is that so important? Because high conflict people try to make things personal. And they say, well, why do you hate me? And you're just setting limits, and it's just part of your job. Management expects me to do this. So that's really the main themes here. And then you can say whatever you need to say. So if you're a manager, you can give people an ear statement. Say, I know this is a frustrating situation. However, here's the policy that we have to implement now, and here's the steps for implementing it. So good luck with that. Let me know if you have any questions. And that's the idea with setting limits and really using all of the CARS method, because it's got 4 steps to it: connecting, analyzing, responding, and setting limits. You may not need to use all 4 in every situation. Sometimes just connecting with the person can really make a difference. I was consulting with a woman in an office who was feeling picked on by a new supervisor. She liked the old supervisor, and the new supervisor seemed to publicly criticize her and give her a hard time. So we talked about ear statements, and rather than avoiding her supervisor, which she had started to do, she would engage with her supervisor. She'd start the day or the week by saying, hey, how you doing? How's your weekend? Okay, well, I'm going to get off to work now. And by engaging the supervisor, giving ear statements with empathy, attention, and respect, she became the supervisor's favorite. And of course, so there was someone else that the supervisor started picking on. So the person I was consulting with gave the other employee a copy of the book. But the idea is sometimes just one part of this will make a difference, but sometimes use all 4 steps.
Bill, sometimes I think people feel like they're a bit apprehensive about setting limits around some of the behaviours, or that they don't necessarily have authority to do so. They might be a co-worker or peer. Do you have any comments around sort of breaking, starting to set limits, getting involved in setting limits?
Well, I think that there's several things here. One is just saying this is what you need, and also just saying what you're going to do. Because you can't control another person, but you can control your responses to that person. You may be able to control some of the consequences for that person. So just you can say something, for example, it's in an email, and you say, this is a procedure we need to follow. You may have overlooked that. Let's say it's an equal coworker. So you're saying you may have overlooked that there's this procedure we have to follow that requires us to do A, B, C, and D. If you have any questions about that, let me know. But I believe we need to follow that, and I will be following that regardless of what other people do. So I hope you'll be doing it too. Something like that. So if you're an equal, you can't really control the other person. You don't want to give them negative feedback, so you can focus on what we need to do and what you're going to do. The other thing is you might say, someone wants to talk to you and you're setting limits, and you're saying, I've got to get back to this other project. My supervisor's breathing down my neck on getting it done on time, on schedule, so I'm going to have to end this conversation now. And so you can control what you do, who you talk to, when, how long, all of those things. A lot of people don't realize you can set personal limits. You can say we need to meet, and when they raise an entirely unrelated topic, you can say, we're going to have to discuss that another day. That's really not on today's agenda. So people don't realize they can do that, but you can do it gently like that and just say this is or isn't what needs to happen today. And,
Nice.
and we give a lot of examples in the book, so I encourage people to look at that so that they realize, so they have things they can say in their pocket. That's what I find helpful. I have phrases I remind myself going into a situation. If something comes up, here's something I can say.
The book is packed with examples in many different contexts and settings. It's the examples really, I found, demonstrate the techniques beautifully. It's very, very practical. Do you want to just talk to matching the characteristics to the method, Bill?
Yeah, I can briefly comment on that. And people don't really need to worry so much about which part of the CARS method to use with which part of what someone else is doing. So I think the CARS method can work, like we said, with anybody. And so generally what we're looking at is when you connect with empathy, attention, and respect, it calms their emotions and helps them manage their emotions. A lot of high conflict people have unmanaged emotions, and they truly have a hard time restraining themselves under stress. And I want to mention that high conflict people, some with personality disorder, some not, can be anywhere on the spectrum of intelligence. Has nothing to do with intelligence. You can be a brilliant but high conflict person. You could be really not very smart at all and a high conflict person. So using these techniques you can use with anybody, but some people really can't control their emotions. There's kind of some brain wiring that they never developed. And so connecting with empathy, attention, and respect is one way to help manage their emotions. all or nothing thinking, you see a lot of that with high conflict people. And so analyzing options helps them get off of that two solutions, it's all or it's nothing, and gets them thinking. And you want them thinking. That's why writing a list, making a proposal, knowing they have a choice helps. Preoccupation with blaming others. So responding to their blame without fighting them head on seems to be really helpful. And some extreme behaviors do need to be stopped, and so we set limits. So you can think about how these each address their problems, but you don't have to think too hard. Just use the whole CARS method or parts of it with anyone and see if it's helpful.
Bill, you go on in the book and you start to talk a little bit about the workplace environment and that high conflict people can split a team or split a workplace, and they seek out advocates. Can you
Yes.
expand on that?
Sure. Yes, it's a really fascinating concept. Both Georgie and I learned about that when we were working in a psychiatric hospital 30 years ago. And one of the psychiatrists brought this article in to our unit. We were working on the substance abuse unit together. And it explained this dynamic, which we saw, but we hadn't really heard, hadn't really been explained. The idea is high conflict people have a lot of that all or nothing thinking, so that they tend to see people as all good or all bad. So they may see someone in a program, and this has been most noted in hospital and substance abuse settings, partly because there's a lot of high conflict people there. So what happens is the high conflict person talks to some of the staff and says how wonderful they are. You're so supportive. I appreciate how you've helped me. You're not at all like, and they'll name some of the other staff who they hate. So they start loving some and hating others. And it's contagious. So the staff starts thinking, wow, you know, that other person over there is acting really inappropriately. And the patient may really exaggerate that and emphasize that and build mistrust. I've consulted with work groups on this. I remember consulting once at a university where they had a department had become split around a student who was really highly manipulative, and half of them felt sympathetic and supportive, and the other half felt unsympathetic and demanding that the student make some changes. And so the staff started getting really upset with each other, and it started to take over all of the business of the department. So that understanding about splitting really helped kind of unlock the adversarial positioning. We see this in legal disputes, where the professionals involved in a case, let's say a high conflict divorce case, and you've got a couple lawyers, you've got a psychologist or two, you've got some other experts, you've got family members with opinions, and they may all start hating each other because of this split. So it's important to know this can happen in any group setting if there's a personality disordered person or a high conflict person present, that they're all or nothing good and bad people thinking is contagious unless you can keep yourself aware that nothing is that all or nothing. Almost nothing, I suppose I should say.
So it's quite easy not to be the target of blame, but still caught up in the environment that they're creating.
Yes.
So what advice would you give someone if they feel that they're being pulled into taking a side position?
Well, I think just reminding that it's not absolute, trying to have some empathy for the other points of view, listening to people, respecting their points of view. For example, about treatment. So in a hospital setting, often the split becomes around treatment. We should go easy on the patient. We should expect more from the patient. And so considering those thoughts and treating them as issues to be addressed rather than good and bad people. So if you find yourself kind of getting emotional about it and you feeling like you really despise some of your coworkers, that's a really good sign that you're getting into being split, and to watch out for that. Maybe even talk about it with the other staff person and say, you know, I'm concerned we're starting to get split here, and I want to understand your point of view and I want you to understand mine. And let's be careful not to have this erode our relationship. So I think those are kind of a way to think about it so it doesn't build.
That sounds great. Bill, you have got a absolutely fantastic method here, which is I know for myself and for many of my clients has been very, very powerful. You have actually written another book called It's All Your Fault, and this is a separate book with an almost identical title. Can you talk about the earlier book and then why you've written this book now?
Sure. The previous book was the first one, and it's called All Your Fault. It's 12 tips for managing people who blame others for everything. And in a sense, the new book, It's All Your Fault at Work, is a sequel to it. So I think it can be helpful to read both. The first book, half of the book is about 4 of the high conflict personalities: narcissists, borderline, antisocial, and histrionic personality disorders, and how they show up as high conflict people in a variety of settings. The second half of that book teaches the CARS method for the first time. So that book came out in 2008. So we're really looking 7 years later. This January, we came out with It's All Your Fault at Work. So this focuses exclusively on the workplace and applying the CARS method. The original It's All Your Fault book talks about any setting. So if you're having conflicts with a neighbor, if you're having conflicts with a family member, like a brother or sister, or mother or father, or adult children, and if you're dealing with strangers who are treating you as a target of blame, that book is helpful. So they're both, I think they're both helpful. The emphasis in the first book is explaining the personalities and the method in any setting. And this new book is purely exclusively about the workplace. So I think people in the workplace would really like this second book because it really gives them practical tools that they can identify with.
And it's jam-packed with examples of how it works, which just makes it really realistic. You can actually hear yourself saying those words when you see it in an example.
Mm-hmm.
We do have time for 1 or 2 questions, so if you want to type a question in the question box, that would be terrific. And while we're seeing if any questions come in, if Bill would like to talk to a little bit about your BIF Response website and potentially your workshop tomorrow.
That would be great. So yes, the BIF Response website has coaching. We have someone who does coaching for BIF responses at a fairly inexpensive cost, as well as articles and information. Now, the workshop I'm doing at Monash University in Melbourne is tomorrow and Friday, and its title is It's All Your Fault at Work. And we're teaching the method, the CARS method, with a lot of examples, a lot of opportunity for discussion, problem solving, specific case situations that people may want to bring. And we're also talking about applying this method as a coaching method. So we'll do a lot of coaching exercises of helping someone with using the CARS method. We'll also be talking about our new ways for work coaching method, which is designed for people who may have some high conflict tendencies and have been referred to try to take off some of the rough edges of how they communicate so they can be a valued employee. But it's also a method that people that want to advance in their careers can use. So it's really teaching conflict resolution methods in a very simple way with a lot of repetition and encouragement from a coach. And this is similar, actually, to our method New Ways for Families, which we developed for high conflict divorce cases. And we also, I should mention, have a website about that. It's newwaysforfamilies.com. And that explains kind of teaching skills to potentially high conflict parents. And that's what we based New Ways for Work on. New Ways means new skills. So that's what the seminar is going to be Thursday and Friday here. And if people are interested in that, they can contact Monash University and look at it's the Australian Centre for Judicial Innovation, ACJI, to sign up if they're interested. So if you're somewhere in Australia, you might be able to get here by tomorrow. The people in the UK and the US, it's probably something you'll have to set up a seminar and have me come out there sometime, or my colleague Georgie DeStefano. And I might mention she and I both do trainings individually and jointly, and we're happy to go anywhere to help people deal with high conflict people at work.
And I can testify that Bill's workshops are fabulous, having attended 4 of them myself over the last few years. And a couple of my clients had the pleasure of being part of a workshop with Bill last year in Australia. And the good news is it appears he's going to be back in Australia this time next year.
That's correct.
We have come to the end of the hour, and I've been delighted to be able to introduce you all to Bill and Georgie's new book via this webinar. And I'd like to thank you, Bill, for taking your time out of what is a hectic schedule to talk to some of my clients and some of your fans. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tess. I've enjoyed this opportunity to speak with you about it.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. If you want a copy of the slides, just shoot me an email. Thank you, and have a good day.